This is Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro. If you drive long haul, short haul, or heavy haul, they're here to empower and inspire women in the trades on tncradio.live. So gear down, sit back, and enjoy.
Welcome to Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro. We're a show that works to inspire and empower women in trucking, in the trades, and every profession. We tackle all kinds of topics and work to encourage women to be their very best with informative guests and women who've been champions. I'm Shelley.
And I'm Kathy.
No topic is not allowed on our rig. We tackle the tough topics along with the not so tough topics. And we like to feature experts and celebrities who can assist women in being the very best they can be. More women than you think end up with someone who is not who they thought they were. It even happens with the very rich. The person you marry can end up being a shifty and dangerous shapeshifter who plunges you into the depths of despair and turmoil. Just imagine living what seems like an enchanted life, only to find out your husband is secretly married to another woman with the same breed of dog you both have together, and he's stolen $96 million as president and CEO of Canopy Financial. So the FBI's in hot pursuit. Kimberly Blackburn was living a jet-setting, affluent lifestyle when her world was turned upside down by a stranger in her midst, her husband. She quietly suffered through abuse with this man who lived a double life but was trying to keep the marriage together for the sake of their son. Then she finds out how bad it really is and decides to leave. Kimberly's tell-all book, Dirty Love, talks of her roller coaster ride as she flees her abusive husband after he turns their world upside down. We have Kimberly with us today to tell her incredible story. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you. It's an honor being here today to talk with you on this very important subject.
Yes. All I can say is, wow. Your story reads like a major crime movie with twists and turns no one wants to experience firsthand. How did all this begin?
Yes, well, it's interesting because this book was just recently published, and it's been an 11-month journey writing it. But to be honest with you, it's been 10 years since this period in my life, and what is in the book is not, a lot of the details you can quick do an internet search and find out a lot more about, especially with the FBI investigation and the lifestyle that we lived. But as far as the abuse and the very private, personal element to it, those were things that I didn't share even with my closest family and friends. And so in the last few years, I started to feel, and we know how trauma can sneak up on you. I thought I really could replace these memories with just a new life and diving into the care of my children and finding stability. And just in the last few years before this opportunity came my way, I started to feel restless and like I needed to dig back into that period of my life. And before I knew it, this book deal dropped into my lap, and I thought to myself, well, maybe there's a reason here for me to heal properly and truly use this story in the life that I live to help other women, including myself. So
absolutely. I know our listeners are going to want to know maybe kind of the cliff notes of everything. How did it start when you first met Jeremy and his climb and your climb to the top? If you kind of want to tell us the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Absolutely. So starting back in my childhood years, I had an amazing upbringing, a loving family. I was an accomplished downhill skier, actually was on a junior Olympic ski team path. I was a competitive equestrian. I traveled the country. I had truly a storybook childhood. And going into college, I faced tragedy. My mother was diagnosed with cancer. So my college experience wasn't the typical experience. I would be in school studying, and on the weekends I would travel from Madison, Wisconsin back home to Minneapolis to help with the care of my mother. And she unfortunately passed away while I was in college. And I believe that sent me, kind of thrust me into an adulthood. And for a period of time, I lost my dad to that grief. And I have an older brother and a younger sister, and we kind of all went on our own paths trying to figure out, well, gosh, I guess it's time to grow up without such an important person in our life.
Yeah.
I ended up taking a job in Chicago, working in technology, and my relationship with Jeremy started in the workplace. He was very senior to me. He wasn't that much older than me, but he was a very, very brilliant mind, a very brilliant technologist. And my first job out of college, I found myself in a relationship that, this is almost, more than 15 years ago. I knew we didn't talk about it as much in our society, kind of that imbalance of power and in relationships in the workplace. And honestly, with the tragedy and the sadness that I had been feeling from losing my mom, I felt important when I was staffed on projects with him and I received attention from him. And looking back at it, I was staffed on projects in New York City and all these amazing places that I got to see at such a young age, truly because of my relationship with this man. I didn't see a downside. I felt like I was on the fast track of growing my career and then meeting someone who really inspired me. And our relationship quickly unfolded. We, within a year of meeting, we were engaged to be married. But that is when I started to feel like the imbalance of power really started to take a hold. I ended up giving up my career. And as he was exploring other employment opportunities, and we moved to Minneapolis and trying to kind of find my way, really became supporting him and finding his way and his career path. And to kind of fast forward a few years, while the control was very prevalent in our relationship, there were often references to infidelity and things that truly weren't the case. It slowly escalated into more verbal abuse. Mm-hmm. And there were moments of physical abuse. In fact, I talk about in Dirty Love, the night before our wedding, having an altercation, but feeling like it was too late to change course, or feeling like, gosh, maybe this is me that caused this, the stress of our wedding, already developing those personality traits that as women, we tend to do to support our loved ones.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And shortly after, within a year or two after we were married, Jeremy started a software company called Canopy Financial, and it quickly picked up steam, and he received significant venture capital backing, landed some of the biggest financial institutions in the country were implementing his software. And all of a sudden we were flying in private jets, and I was driving a Bentley, and we had $1 million home in Minneapolis. And I truly felt like, gosh, maybe the sacrifice of his work and the stress in our relationship was worth it, because from an outside perspective, we had made it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that'd be a fairy tale life.
Yes, but as I describe in the book, inside I was suffering greatly. And it was made worse by that lifestyle, because to everybody else, they envy it. Mm-hmm. And they don't, and even if they see the red flags, or they question your behavior, it's quickly softened by, well, wow, where is she off to next? And then for me personally, there was moments where I was so alone, but all of a sudden, a 2-carat diamond earrings or a new car would show up, and that feeling would soften. But it ultimately wouldn't bring happiness, because we know those material fixes, they just fill a void that's a very, very short term. So I talk a lot in the book about that dynamic and those feelings, being so conflicted in my marriage. And then I get pregnant unexpectedly. And I spend most of my pregnancy alone, justifying that it's worth the sacrifice of him growing this this new exciting software company. And after Callan is born, we end up taking a major shift and deciding to move to Malibu. And it was against everything I thought we were planning on doing. I mean, at that time, we were talking about building a horse farm in Minneapolis, outside of Minneapolis, and it shifted so quickly. But I took that leap of faith again, despite knowing that I was suffering in this relationship, because there was more at stake. I had a baby to think about. The idea of breaking up my marriage just didn't seem right to me at that time. But I was still so young. So I take the leap of faith, move to Malibu. Within a month of being there, I receive an email from my brother, who is working in venture capital in Silicon Valley. And in the email is a link to an FBI investigation, a press release. And the email simply said, "Kimberly, your life is about to get really hard.
Wow.
I am here. We will get through this."
Within a month of moving here?
Within a month of moving to Malibu.
Malibu. Wow.
And I realized that my life and the way we were living was a fraud, that Jeremy had been misappropriating funds to support a very lavish lifestyle. It was only about a few weeks after that I learned of his double life, that while he was claimed to be traveling so much for work and to develop business for Canopy Financial, he was also in another relationship.
Oh my goodness.
And by that point in Malibu, he was actually living with this woman part-time, because he was having to split time just a mile away.
That's crazy. Wow.
And
now, was he actually married to her?
I was never able to, it didn't matter. I was never able to confirm. I've heard conflicting things, that he was engaged. He was eventually married to her after we did divorce. So, but in discovering all of this, here I am in Malibu in this $6 million home. And as they say, more money, more problems. I don't know that it's more problems, but it's different problems. Mm-hmm. So I had the FBI putting pressure on us, and they froze our bank accounts and credit cards. But yet here I was in this house that I had to maintain. And, all of a sudden I was forced to take a look at my life and say, okay, all of this has to go away, and I need to find the safest path for myself and my son to start a new life. And I had to do it with so little resources. And at the same time of unraveling this, I had to face the real element, the very personal element, that I had been loyal to this man for so many years, who just wasn't loyal back. That so much of what I believed was based on a lie.
Stay tuned for more of Women Road Warriors coming up.
Industry movement Trucking Moves America Forward is telling the story of the industry. Our safety champions, the women of trucking, independent contractors, the next generation of truckers, and more. Help us promote the best of our industry. Share your story and what you love about trucking. Share images of a moment you're proud of. And join us on social media. Learn more at truckingmovesamerica.com.
Welcome back to Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro.
We're talking with Kimberly Blackburn, who discovered her ex-husband, Jeremy, the former CEO of Canopy Financial, was misappropriating funds and had stolen $96 million and was being pursued by the FBI. She gave up her career and her goals to marry this man who'd become very abusive, and she was forced to flee with their son with very few resources. Kimberly, he was engaged in a real power play with you. And he put you in a vulnerable position. You had to give up your career. So that made it difficult for you to leave too, I'm sure.
It did. It's the perspective and the wisdom I have now. it is hard for women. It's hard to have a family and to maintain a career. And sometimes the economics do not make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But where I really got it wrong is I had my own path in my 20s, and a relationship should have never shifted that path. Our paths come together and complement each other in a very beautiful way. And
Right.
sometimes you have to make decisions on the type of work we do. Should you want to bring children into the mix? But I gave that up. My path became supporting him because in my mind, he seemed to have so much more potential in creating the life that we wanted. But in reality, that life was based on things that ultimately don't make you happy. A beautiful home, travel. So that was the powerful shift in, where we lose ourselves as women. And I do think in your 20s, naturally, there's this pressure to check boxes, right? You got to
Oh, yeah.
meet your soulmate, find that perfect job, maybe have a baby, buy a house. And and for some reason as women, if by 30, you haven't found that person, all of a sudden there's something wrong.
Yes, there's this panic that sets in.
Yes.
I think in your case, you were especially vulnerable. You'd lost your mother. You'd had a lot of grief. You were looking for someone you could look up to. And I think you were enamored by Jeremy and his power. And it was sexy and it was appealing and it was exciting. And you thought, he's my knight in shining armor, perhaps.
Yes, he hit the easy button for me. I mean, it was the years in college were so challenging that when I met this person that was just so dynamic, he seemed to have it all figured out.
Mm-hmm.
It was easy.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't occur to me. I was raised by very strong women. Didn't occur to me that after, working in New York City, after finishing a project, that joining him in his hotel room watching reality television was inappropriate. Like it didn't even cross my mind. And the classic, I remember confiding in my brother about it, and he quickly shut it down, telling me I was going to ruin my career. And rather than listening to my older brother, I thought, well, who is he to judge? He doesn't know how much I've struggled with the loss of my mom. This is the one really good thing in my life right now. Why can't he be supportive? And that truly was the first moment that, you hear this, that abusers try to separate their victims from their support system.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Oh, 100%.
And
100%.
started in ways that didn't even occur to me.
It's very,
very
very subtle.
It's very insidious, and it's a gradual process. You don't even know it. It's like, what is the phrase? You put a frog in water and slowly, slowly turn up the heat. It doesn't even know it's getting boiled.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's an important part of this story, because I think many people looking at it think, gosh, Kimberly, I mean, at what point when he grabbed you by the throat or said these things were you like, it's enough? You have a baby.
Mm-hmm.
By the time it gets that far, you are so far gone. Your confidence, your sense of purpose, your sense of self-worth, that you start to normalize those behaviors that seem that are unimaginable.
So it took a tremendous amount of courage for you to grab your son and leave after you found out all of these terrible things, that Jeremy's living a double life, and then you've got the FBI and in this investigation, and Jeremy's accused of stealing millions of dollars, which I see that he was convicted in 2012 and sentenced to 15 years in prison for what he did.
Yes. So it's interesting. And going back to the moment where I knew I needed to create my own life with my son, Cal, on average, it takes 8 times for a woman to get out of an abusive relationship.
Yeah, I've heard something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
And I, in many ways, feel like if it was just the FBI investigation, I say that's a big deal, right?
Yeah,
that maybe I would have tried to work through it with him, tried to figure out what happened, what went wrong. Or if it was just the infidelity, I would have thought, oh gosh, I still very much felt that loyalty to him, but having all of these forces at me, it in many ways made me kind of look up and say, gosh, is this my mom telling me it is time? Because I truly have no choice. I need to separate from him, not only for, and I had no knowledge of what he was doing as far as his criminal wrongdoings with misappropriating funds. But I needed to save myself from that. I needed to set a very firm intention that this is not something that I support. This is not something I had knowledge of. So that, which wasn't hard to do because I truly didn't. And our relationship had been estranged and very inconsistent for a while. But then when the infidelity hit, that was just that level of betrayal and that feeling of despair when someone hurts you that way. Yeah. There was no other path for me. And, I hired multiple attorneys to help me work my way through it. I was selling every one of my personal assets, from my expensive prize show horses to my jewelry, to be able to afford these retainers and attorneys. I had to with the support of my best friend, really prioritize how to live in Malibu. I mean, at one point it was interesting. I talk about this in the book where, living in the hills of Malibu overlooking the ocean, like, to be able to support the beautiful vegetation. I remember talking about the avocado trees and the citrus trees that I would treasure these trees so much. They were kind of my sense of peace being out there when everything was crumbling. I had to stop watering these trees because I couldn't afford the water bill. And I knew I just had to buy as much time as I could with the very limited amount of money I had in my bank account. And ultimately, I knew I needed to get back home to Minneapolis. So it was having to be incredibly resourceful after living so many years of truly just being entitled, not having a care or a worry in the world about money. And I even show in my story the times where I missed that life and how the psychology of it, like, every day facing this pressure as a single mom, and how I wanted to go back. Now, did I want to go back? No, but it was just such a hard process, not only psychologically, but also just logistically trying to make it work especially as a single mother.
Well, your world had crumbled. And what you went through is really, it's at a different level, but it's the same kind of a decision that a mother has to make, and a woman trying to get away from an abusive situation. You have to prioritize. You have to figure out, how can I do this with the resources that I have? In your particular case, it was on a much larger scale, which probably makes it even more daunting. And you're going to have a lot of guilt somehow. It's like, how did I miss this? What did I do wrong? And of course, this is where the abuser plays games with the victim. They make us feel guilty. I did it somehow. If I'd done something different. And that's, I think, what a lot of women go through. And that probably is why they keep going back in an abusive situation.
Absolutely. And in my situation, and I really do my best in the story to talk about what I was feeling, what I was thinking. And I share emails that back and forth between Jeremy and I. And Jeremy was a very, very brilliant man. And his mastery of like just the language and his ability to convince me to play on my emotions and to pull at those heartstrings. He was so good at it. And I talk about in the book, I show that his initial attempts of blaming me if I choose divorce, and that how we would be another statistic and Callan would have to face that reality. But the reality was that he was going to prison for a very, very long time. I mean, that wasn't a decision that was even put in my hands, right? Like, he created this.
He created a major abandonment for his family.
Yes, but even as this is coming to light, this investigation and the realities of his punishment, still projecting that onto me. And I become
Of
wise
course,
to it. And
gaslighting.
Yep.
yeah, I
Yep.
become wise to it. And I show in the book how that very powerful shift happens where I go from seeking his approval to then knowing exactly
Hmm.
what he's trying to accomplish.
Mhm.
Kudos
But
to
it's,
you. You
Yes.
know, I have been raised since I've been very, very small, since childhood, in a very violent environment. And even when I was nursing, I mean, I'm carrying around these wounds from childhood, and the men that I picked, albeit I was a little drunk, but okay, okay, maybe a lot drunk, but the men that I picked weren't the greatest. And of course, it went from all that childhood trauma and into just continued domestic violence. And the play of emotions is a continual. And when I finally, I call it the great escape, when I was 42, had to technically I had to unlearn 40 years of brainwashing and of, being told how useless I am, and how, how awful, and how I pollute the air, and how I'm a waste of skin and all that crap. But so I had to unlearn all that. And then the hardest part was trying to figure out, well, who am I at 42? I mean, I know I'm smart because I'm a nurse, but other than that, I didn't know what I liked, what I didn't like. It was like a whole new relearning of who Kathy really was. I mean, if that wasn't hard enough, that what was even more difficult was learning to accept how freaking awesome I am in the sense of my qualities and what I have to offer the world, and learning to recognize, like, the light that I carry and that I'm able to give to others, because it had gotten so lost in what other people's opinions of me were, right? So that you're right, that shift is, it's gradual. Number one, it doesn't happen overnight, but number two, you have to be willing to be open to see that. You have to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. That's how I like to say it.
yeah.
So
And Kathy, it's so, and even now with all of this perspective, with having written 50,000 words about my experience,
mhm.
up until a month or two ago, I still struggled feeling like I wasn't enough.
Oh,
Actually allowing people
yeah.
in my life to have access to me without any reciprocation, and me just diving in the way I so selflessly do, because it's just my
Mhm.
heart. It's just my way of trying to prove that I'm enough by doing, I mean, if I told you the things I did for
Yeah,
people, you
yeah.
would be shocked.
But
But
that's
it comes from a
codependency,
place,
right?
yeah, it
Yeah.
comes from a place of trauma. It is
Yeah,
that fawning behavior where you just,
yeah.
and in reality, in the last 10 years, while I was very fortunate to have some beautiful relationships and to have, um, I'm so blessed in many ways. I never dealt with this trauma.
Mhm.
And I lost myself in a different way of just thinking, okay, I don't really know what my identity is. I don't know what fuels my soul or what gives me purpose. But for whatever reason, I thought that was okay. My kids were happy. I was safe. But as we know, which is what you said at 42, there's just much more to
Oh yeah,
life
there's a
and
lot.
to our happiness.
There's layers that you have to uncover, and trying to, like, figuring ourselves out. I mean, that's the one good thing about aging is that once you realize, like, hey, man, right? Like, how come I didn't learn that before? But
Yes.
um, no, it's very, very difficult. But the biggest thing, and like Shelley, she likes this phrase that I say: you got to be kind to your mind.
Yep.
You have to learn to acknowledge that there's days that, man, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to live in that moment, but then again, then that next day, get back up and then start over again, right?
Absolutely. And to honor, I mean, boundaries is such a hot topic. Everybody's talking
Oh,
about
oh my
boundaries right now.
God.
It is
I
not
I
you.
had to ask what it meant. I didn't know. I didn't know what codependency was. I'm like, what's
Yeah.
that? Right?
Yeah.
So,
And I know it's the way we talk about it, it makes it seem so black and white.
mhm.
but it's not. We all inherently, I think as women, we want to have hope. We see the best in people.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, we want to
Yeah.
take care of people. We want, you know, I in many ways have been motivated by, I didn't necessarily have the support getting through this situation, in part by choice, because I was trying to cover. I was so ashamed,
Mhm.
but in part because I had lost my mom. And, you know, so I look at some people in my life and I think, gosh, I could help you. I'm in a position I can help you.
Mhm.
You just, it's not always that simple. It's
No.
important to be very selective about who you direct your energy to. And I have learned
Yeah.
that time and time again, even after going through this situation with Jeremy. I have still struggled with that. So I think it's important, you know, as I share my story, when I talk to women who struggle in their own relationships, I want to say, you know, I don't have it figured out, but I can tell you what I'm learning and what I've been through.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to be attracted to the same type of person if you don't actively think about it. For some reason, we tend to gravitate toward the same chaos because it's comfortable because we're used to it. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense on why the human mind works that way, but it happens.
Sure.
Stay tuned for more of Women Road Warriors coming up.
Trucking Moves America Forward, or TMAF, is building a positive image of trucking by telling the story of the hardworking drivers and industry professionals who support the industry. And you can be a part of it. Learn more about TMAF and how you can join and be a part of the industry movement working to build a strong image of trucking by visiting TMAF's website at truckingmovesamerica.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our latest channel, TikTok.
Welcome back to Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro.
It doesn't matter how rich or poor you are. Abusive relationships occur in all walks of life. And women can find themselves in untenable situations with a terrible stranger that they've married who's leading a double life as an abuser, adulterer, and even a thief. We're talking to Kimberly Blackburn, co-author of Dirty Love, who's lived this very story of a man who misappropriated $96 million from his company. She was able to get away and start a new life. Kimberly, you've shared quite the experience. Why do you think women are drawn into these kind of relationships?
One part
know-
of it is feeling like, you know, if you know, I talk about not feeling like I'm enough, feeling like I need to
Yeah.
prove my worth. So until you really dig into who that person is and you can look at yourself in the mirror and say, she's pretty amazing. Like anybody who is close to me is really fortunate. I think you're
Yeah.
susceptible to that, to
You know,
those unhealthy relationships.
And Jeremy, like other abusers, he saw your insecurity and he just preyed on it.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And in the second life he was leading, I mean, she was younger and it was easier, right? You know, she had those vulnerabilities that I had when we first met. You know, it's pretty textbook. Now with him, the mental illness, and I talk about it in the very last chapter of Dirty Love, is a letter to Callan, my son, who's now 14. And I talk about what I hope this story means for him. And I talk about mental health because Jeremy's path could have been much different with the proper treatment and the proper care. He truly was a brilliant mind. And it's sad that the system failed him in the way it did. And it's, you know, a combination of a number of factors, his upbringing, you know, his treatment plans. You know, I can't speak to it all, but that's a very important message out of this book is the importance of mental health and being aware of that in our relationships.
What was his diagnosis?
You know, I've never seen an official diagnosis. I saw court documents that infer that he was bipolar
Okay.
and manic depressive.
Mm-hmm.
And he definitely fits that description. It was
to live
high
with.
risk, high reward.
Mhm.
You know, I talk about in Dirty Love, he was spending a lot of time in Las Vegas. And I assumed it was for conferences and speaking engagements. Well, I happened to take a trip to Las Vegas with some friends, and Jeremy hinted at some places to go and just use my name. And a whole new world opened when I did. And I quickly realized, I was like, well, gosh, Jeremy's doing something else here because he has a lot of power. And that chapter is very interesting in what I discover in Las Vegas,
Mhm.
and was very indicative of the person that he really wanted to be. Someone perceived as having it figured out, someone perceived as very powerful. Because when you do have money, especially in places like Vegas, you know, it buys you that.
Sure.
So,
And people find it sexy. So he would have had a lot of people gravitating toward him. And that was his power. He couldn't find the power within himself.
true, which is sad because he truly was a man of many gifts. And, but you're right. And the money, his generosity was to control people.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that's the insidious part of it. And that is so classic of an abuser. They want to control no matter what, because I think in so many ways they feel out of control.
Yes. And the irony is the more he tried to control, the more out of control he was.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And in the end, you know, he was sentenced to prison. And the day before he was supposed to report to prison, I received a phone call that he was missing.
Oh, goodness.
And this was over a year after our last interaction. And I was in a really strong place. But obviously getting that phone call sent me into a bit of a tailspin. And I
Mhm. No
picked up,
doubt.
grabbed Cal and went for the nearest hotel to try to make sure, knowing the
Mhm.
gravity of the day.
Yeah.
And out of fear, I fled with Cal. And a few hours later, I had learned that he took his own life. And I talk about that experience and those emotions in Dirty Love.
Wow.
And how I processed that, the dynamic of this person that I deeply loved, the father of my son, but that also feeling free finally.
Yeah.
And so I navigate that, you know, and do my best to share that insight in Dirty Love.
Wow.
Wow.
It's a lot.
It is.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
The amount of emotions you would have had at that point, you know, because you had loved the man, you know, and it's still a loss. And you're thinking, oh my, now my son doesn't have a father, even
Yeah.
though
It's a loss of hope.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
It's a loss of what you build in your mind. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
sure is. But like you said, you were free. In a way, he set you free. So there wouldn't have been the visitations to prison with your son and having to explain all of this to your son, and maybe the manipulation that Jeremy would have been doing with your son.
Yes. And you'll see in Dirty Love, I actually put after he passed away, I received a letter from him, and it talks about that.
Oh,
It talks about how it simplifies my life. But I'm curious, when you read the letter, if you read it a second time, how you really feel about it.
So he wrote you a letter before he killed himself?
He did, yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
And in many ways, he fell on his sword and talked about how much he had struggled with his mental health and how much he's wronged me. And then he talked about ultimately wanting better for Callan, and that it was easier to tell Cal that his dad was gone rather than his dad was in prison. And you see glimpses of this man that I think I married, but I also see glimpses of a man that's manipulating in his words. So it's an interesting takeaway. I think it's reading it, you can go both ways on it. But I thought that was important to see that, and that's why it's in the book.
Wow.
Abusers do have double messages.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, they do. I read the first portion that you sent, and I was quite captivated, I got to tell you. I was like, what? It's over? What?
Yeah.
Yes. Well,
So yeah, no, definitely be
thank
getting
you.
a copy of that.
Yes, well, I would love to. I'll send you a signed copy. I would love to do
Well,
that.
we'll
But
trade
That would be,
books. We'll trade
yes, I
books,
would
right?
love that. I would love that. Well, I think it is a story when people hear that it does seem like a Netflix series. Like it's
Oh, it
hard to
does.
imagine. And when I wrote it, and after I was done, it was a mixture of emotions. I was like,
Oh
gosh,
yeah,
I'm thankful
yeah,
I'm alive.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
But seeing all of the events in front of my eyes, I truly was blown away. And I was like, oh
Yeah,
goodness.
I'd
Mhm.
say that talk about that when in my speaking engagements. Yeah, I said, it's one thing to know what happened to you and to know what you lived through, but it's a completely different set of circumstances when you actually sit down and put pen to paper, and
Yes,
then you're like, oh my God,
it is.
Sure.
It's very
I can't believe I'm
cathartic.
alive.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is very cathartic, but in a way it's powerful because your story, and I do believe it is a tool that psychologists use, especially with victims of trauma, that
Yeah.
when you write your story, it becomes your narrative. There's nothing more or nothing less than what it is. And it truly is a step towards healing. And I believe it
Mhm.
now after
Yeah.
Mhm.
after going through this process.
It
Oh,
empowers
yeah.
you, and it's a way to put the threats to bed. Once they're on paper, you can look back and say, I'm bigger than that. This is not going to get me down. And look what I've done. It
Yeah.
really drives home how strong we truly are inside.
Like, I know when I wrote my book, like I knew I had it had to come out. I sat because I wrote my book in sitting in the equipment at work in the water truck or the truck, because oftentimes we're down for weather, and so you have to stay in your equipment for 13 hours a day. Well, I got 8 hamsters and one wheel in this noggin. How am I going to use my time, right? So I decided to write the book. Well, I wrote it in a month, and it basically, I wrote it on a legal pad, and it was basically one big blah to get the remnants of all that emotional crap out. And then I put it away and I never looked at it again. And when I went back, when I got back home and I sat in front of the computer, now I had a clear mind. Now I could actually, write what I wanted to write.
Right.
I had to get rid of the emotional stuff first because
Yeah.
my story's heavy, right? So
Well, and when I started writing, and I don't have a writing background.
me neither. Never wrote anything.
I was a good
Nothing.
student. I think I'm a good creative writer. Like if you get a thank you note from me, you're going to get like a full paragraph of
Yeah.
emotional. So I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
now I see what I've written, and it definitely is a calling for me. But I will say, when I did start this process,
Mhm.
my body rejected it in every way. I would
Oh
bounce from
yeah.
coffee shop to bar, and I'm not even a drinker. I was like, well, maybe vodka will help. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
But to give myself permission to feel, there was it was a very interesting process because my body really wanted to reject that. And I felt it in so many different ways.
Mhm.
But then when I finally got to that point, it took maybe 3 or 4 weeks. It all came, and it all came as if it happened just yesterday. And that
Mhm.
made me realize that this is absolutely the right path and something I needed
Mhm.
to do to free myself and use it as a place of power.
It puts your life in perspective, and you can truly see what you've accomplished and where you're headed. I think something like that, when you can actually commit it to paper, it gives you a roadmap for where the heck do I want to be in my future? And this is who I truly am, which is why I think therapists have you journal and that sort of thing too. So, but what you
Yeah,
did to
absolutely.
step out of this, even though you lived an entirely different lifestyle than a lot of the rest of the world, it's still the same challenge. You had to
Mhm.
figure out,
Yeah.
how the heck am I going to survive now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember walking the University of Minnesota campus, after I'd moved back to Minneapolis, thinking, gosh, I have all these attorneys. All of them are shooting in the dark trying to help me. I could do a much better job. I'm going to go to law school. But
There you
then I'm
go.
thinking, well, how do I go to law school when I have a child? How do I afford the student loans? How do I pay for childcare?
Mhm.
I don't have any family close. How do I make this work? I
Yeah.
know I'm capable of it. I know I would be an amazing attorney, but
Mhm.
how do you make it work? And so many women are up against that
Oh,
challenge.
sure.
Mhm.
And it keeps us still in our relationships because
does.
we're, you
Yep.
know,
Women go back just because of that. There's security even in the abuse and chaos because they're taking care of children. They feel the need to just stay because leaving is too much of a challenge or scarier than staying in their minds.
yeah, absolutely. And I think an important step, I get this question often, what is the first step? For me, there was no choice. There's an FBI investigation. I had to take a step. But
Yep.
when you are frozen in a relationship and you feel like you do not have options, turning to that one person that can be unemotional and listen, and perhaps someone you could bounce ideas off of to really define what the actual steps are to get out of this relationship. And if it's a financial concern, sometimes just working through that process and seeing your worst case scenario and your best case scenario, knowing that it will probably be in between that,
Mm-hmm.
is enough momentum to empower you to make change. And, because when we sit alone in our thoughts, it seems impossible.
Oh, it does.
As I was walking that University of Minnesota campus, I was like, there's no way. There's no option here.
When we get enmeshed or admired or in our thoughts, we can drown in them. I think our thoughts can be like quicksand, just sucking us in. We can find every reason why we can't, instead of saying, I can do this. To step away and look at the whole situation. It's hard to do when you're right in the middle of it.
It is hard, especially without someone that you can lean on.
Yep.
Mhm.
That's very true. And many women in abusive situations, because the abuser has kept them away from their support system, they don't have that. So that keeps them trapped too.
It does. Yeah.
It really does take enormous strength to leave. Women often stay because they feel they have no choice, or it's just an insidious pattern that they can't break. Wouldn't you agree with that, Kathy?
Such a cycle. I mean,
is.
I've spoken to at least a few thousand women over the years in shelters and in countries all over. And it's all the same. Doesn't matter what culture, what what nationality. I mean, abuse is abuse. And the excuse me, the bottom line is, well, the woman is stuck there with no finances, no avenue of hope, and no resources. I mean, I don't know about here, but I know in Canada you can only stay in the shelter for 21 days. After that, they kick you out. Well, where are you supposed to go, especially if you have children?
Sure.
And
Right?
especially in the
Yep.
time of COVID, which has
Oh my
really
God,
hit
yeah.
our
Yeah.
shelters so hard.
Sure.
Yeah.
It has.
So
Yeah,
it's
and
very,
finding
very
that
hard.
it is, and so many women don't have. I was so fortunate to have siblings who jumped in, but
That is good.
even allowing that support was a gradual process. I talk about in Dirty Love when I learned of the infidelity after the FBI investigation. I was so fearful of I had told Jeremy that I would never see him again. And I was so fearful of my life. I
Mhm.
packed up Cal in the car. I drove from Malibu up to San Francisco. And my brother was he understood that my insecurity, but he didn't know that I was being abused by Jeremy the way I was. And so the fear of my life, it's almost like he didn't understand that behavior. He didn't know where it was coming from. So I was seeking support, trying to reach out to people who really, truly did not know what I had been living, because I had built such a facade
Sure.
around our life, and I had protected Jeremy so fiercely.
Yeah. A lot of women do that. And a lot
Well,
of it's
yeah.
based in shame.
Well,
So
look at
very
me. I mean, I was
unfortunate.
nursing and I was in and out of the women's shelter. Nobody at work knew because I was really good at putting on that face, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kimberly, you have a very compelling story here, and all women can relate to this. It really abuse has no financial boundaries. It happens to everyone. And really, when you think about it, the challenges are the same. Getting away, regaining yourself and your strength within yourself to go on. All of these messages are the same. And it's so very important. Where do people find your book?
So you can find it on Amazon. If you search for Dirty Love and Kimberly Blackburn, you'll see it pop up. But another place I like to direct people to is actually my Instagram. And I have never been big on social media, partially because I have been so guarded, as you can imagine, from living the life that I've lived. But I have documented the last, 10 months of this journey and sharing my story. And it's in a pretty powerful way. There's a few interviews out there that I talk about my purpose and what inspired me. And there's a link, of course, to purchase the book. But it's now using social media this way has, in many ways, brought me back to life. Like I see all the sides of me that I'm starting to really love to see. And I think that's the power of using it with purpose and intention. So I hope to show that, at least to the people that want to dive into that part of me.
Thank you for bringing your message forward. This is going to help a lot of women. And certainly there's intrigue in your life. People are going to have that. They want to see how the other side lives, if you will.
Yeah.
But then they'll realize, women, no matter where, they're experiencing the same issues. And I can do this. Kimberly could do it. I can do it.
Yes. And to be still for a lifestyle, ultimately, it's not worth the expense of our mental health and our happiness.
That's right.
Oh, no kidding.
You can't buy happiness. You can rent the hell out of it for a while, but it's not yours.
Yes. And I do. And you see it on different levels all the time. The women that lose their path to support their spouse. It's hard as caretakers, but it is possible. It's important.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Kimberly, for being on the show. You've got a very compelling message.
You're welcome. It was fun to talk to you today.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Women Road Warriors with Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro. If you want to be a guest on the show or have a topic or feedback, email us at info@tncradio.live.
Thank you for listening to another great interview on tncradio.live. And don't forget, be sure to subscribe to our podcast of Women Road Warriors. It's free. All of the material you hear on tncradio.live on our website, our broadcasts, or our podcasts are copyrighted. There can be no distribution without the express consent of tncradio.live and its partners. For inquiries, write us at info@tncradio.live.